Hello, hello, hello. It is part 3 of our look at homeostasis. And in this third video and final video, we're going to be focused on the mechanisms that are used to maintain homeostasis. So, what happens when you're outside and you're running and your body's overheating? Why do you sweat? All right, what's the purpose behind that? Is there a purpose? If you go up to New England during the winter and you don't bring a heavy winter jacket because you're from Florida, what happens? Why do you start shivering? Right? Or in fact, I guess you even shiver here in Florida too. Why does that happen? Right? What's going on with that? And so we need to look at the processes that are used to maintain homeostasis. And so understand that while homeostasis is this concept, this idea that we keep balance within the body, right? The range by which homeostasis is maintained is called dynamic equilibrium. Right? So dynamic equilibrium is the process, or I should say it is the range by which we maintain homeostasis. Right. Dynamic equilibrium. So if we think about this word of dynamic equilibrium, right, equilibrium means balance. Right, it means balance. Dynamic, though, dynamic here means variability, or you've got some give in that equilibrium. So if you've ever done any kind of climbing and rappelling, right, rock climbing or rappelling, surface rappelling, you know that you've got two ropes that you use. You've got a static rope and you've got a dynamic rope. And at the bottom, you're usually either anchored to something on a winch, or you've got a belayer. You've got a person that's actually down there and it's kind of giving you slack. And the rope that belayer has is static rope. Right? So it keeps it taut, gives you tension, and your body weight kind of is what gives that belayer the signal to go ahead and let out some more rope. You don't want a whole lot of slack in that static rope because it's static. It's not going to stretch. But you're also anchored with this secondary backup rope, so that if for some reason the belayer drops the rope, right, and that static rope goes, you don't fall to your death. That backup rope is dynamic rope. All right. In other words, when that dynamic rope catches, you kind of do a little bit of a bounce, and that rope has give in it, and then it tightens up. Right? But it's got a range of bounce to it or give to it. And that's exactly what we mean here when we say dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic here means there's a range in which balance is achieved. And when you are in balance within that range of acceptability, you've got homeostasis. Right? So homeostasis is the big picture. Dynamic equilibrium is the confines, the low end and the high end, in which we achieve homeostasis. Negative feedback right here is the process in which we maintain this balance within the range. Right? Negative feedback is the process in which we actually are able to keep homeostasis. And so negative feedback is the process that detects slight changes within the body and signals changes to reverse things. It's negative because it's reversing a change. Right? It's opposing a change. So you're out running, you're working up a sweat, all right? And that sweat is directly in response to the body overheating. You're no longer within the acceptable range. You're no longer within dynamic equilibrium of body temperature for homeostasis. Your body is 1 second away from dying if it doesn't correct it. And so you sweat. And that sweat, that water is storing heat, metabolic heat, that's being released from the cells. And it's released into the environment, which helps to cool the body, to bring it back down under 100 degrees Fahrenheit. 98.6. That's normal body temperature. So does that mean if you're 98.7, you're not normal? Does that mean if you're 98.5, you're not normal? No. Absolutely not. Between 96 and 100 degrees, you're okay. Or 96.5 and 100 degrees, you're okay. Anything outside of that, you've got a fever if you're up above 100. Or your body's overheating and it's going to start sweating to release that water. Your blood pressure goes up. Get these little baroreceptors that are there to monitor that. It sends a signal to the brainstem, the medulla oblongata. There's a region within that brainstem, the medulla, called the Medullary Cardiac Control Center, the MCCC. And the job of the Medullary Cardiovascular Control Center is to tell the blood vessels to dilate, and it tells the cardiac muscle to decrease cardiac output to lower blood pressure. If you lower stroke volume, you lower cardiac output, and if you cause vasodilation so that the blood that is there has more space to fill, you lower your blood pressure. So when your blood pressure goes too high, it works to reverse it. That's the idea behind negative feedback. The whole point of negative feedback is to bring the body back into dynamic equilibrium so that you achieve homeostasis. So here in this image, all right, you've got yourself some process that is happening where A leads to B, B leads to C, and C produces a whole lot of D. Right? That D might be heat. That D might be blood pressure. That D might be, because if you think about this, and I get tired of writing in red. Let's do blue. If you think about this, this is the receptor that is talking to the control center. All right. That might be going ahead and referring to or talking about the effectors that is leading to some response. And so if you're running, you want the blood pressure to kind of increase to keep the blood going so you're circulating the oxygen. But you don't want that blood pressure to get too high. And so maybe that's blood pressure. Maybe that's glucose in the blood after a heavy meal. Maybe that is some hormone level that's causing something to happen. Maybe it's calcitonin being secreted from the thyroid in response to bone development. Whatever it might be. Whatever it might be. We have a lot of it. Well, in negative feedback, what ends up happening here is we say we've got too much of that response. So we're going to shut it down. We're going to block the receptor from talking to the control center so the effectors are not producing the response to bring it back to normal. we're going to bring that, whatever that D is, back down to a normal range. So again, this idea of negative feedback is to prevent going too far outside of the range of acceptability, dynamic equilibrium. Because remember, whenever you lose homeostasis, you are one snap of a finger away from dying. Okay? The only way you can guarantee that you will be alive to hear the end of this sentence is if you maintain homeostasis. That's it. Now, and this here is kind of a diagram here that kind of depicts that balance. All right, and in this case here, it's sweating up here and shivering down there. So you can kind of get that idea. Right? The body is constantly, like a seesaw, constantly trying to navigate, keeping the body not too warm, not too cold, not too low of a blood pressure, not too high of a blood pressure, not too low of blood glucose levels, not too high of blood glucose levels, not too low of human growth hormone, not too high of human growth hormone. Whatever it might be. Whatever it might be. But this shows that relationship for you. And so take some time, study this. Make sure you can apply. Make sure you understand where do you see the negative feedback in this diagram. And how does that negative feedback tie in with those 6 steps? Can you identify the 6 steps in here of maintaining homeostasis? Can you identify the set point? Can you identify the stimulus? Can you identify the receptor? Can you identify the control center? Can you identify the effector? Can you identify the response? So on and so forth. Right? Are you seeing that? Here's another example. This is a great example, excuse me, of maintaining blood pressure. Right? How many times have you've been like sound asleep, drool coming out of the mouth, your pillow is wet because you were in such a sound sleep that you've spent the last 6 hours drooling, and you wake up and your hands you're wiping this drool or the saliva off your face, and you stick your hand in the pillow and you're like all right, you were asleep, out, and the alarm goes off and startles you. You ever jump out of bed and then get lightheaded and fall back into bed, and you're like, oh, that didn't work. That wasn't a good idea. This is why they have snooze. They have snooze so you can wake up a little bit and not fall back into bed. That's what snooze is for. Why? Why do you get lightheaded when you jump out of bed like that? Why? Because 60% of the blood is stored within the veins, and when you're laying down, the blood pools in the veins. Less blood within the arterioles. So your blood pressure is actually a little bit more elevated because of the amount of blood that is in the veins as opposed to anywhere else within the body. When you stand up, what little blood is in the arterioles drain out, and your blood pressure bottoms out, which is why you get lightheaded, which is why your eyes start to see black spots, and then you fall back into bed. Well, it takes a couple beats. It takes about 2 beats of the heart to get that heart pumping again to restore the blood pressure. Right? And that's what this is showing here. Again, it's a classic negative feedback system. Now, the flip side of that is positive feedback. So positive feedback does the opposite of negative feedback. Positive feedback pushes the body further out of homeostasis. So you've got some change that brings you out of homeostasis, and then the effects of this feedback loop pushes it further out. Now you're sitting there and you're going, but Young, you just said if we go out of homeostasis, we are one snap of the finger away from dying. That can lead to death. But in some cases, it's beneficial for the body to force the body out of a normal state of dynamic equilibrium. It's beneficial to amplify a response instead of fighting it and bringing it back. What are those examples? Well, the birthing process. You guys, you and I can't relate to this. Right? So you've got to trust me. And by the way, let me just say this right now. All right, I will say this a number of times between AMP1 and AMP2. Listen closely, guys. Girls, turn off the sound. Let me have the guys here for a couple seconds. This is a guy moment. Girls, don't pay attention. Guys, understand now. Males are the weaker sex. We can't hang. We just can't do it. We are the weaker sex. Most of natural miscarriages that happen within the first trimester are males, because there's so much happening physiologically we can't hang, and we tap out. We're like, forget it. No, nope, done. Abort me now. Like, I'm done. Over it. And that continues straight through. Those of us that didn't tap out, we spend the rest of our life tapping out. We get a hangnail and we're in bed for like 2 days curled up in a ball crying. Can't do anything. We have to be waited on. We are the weaker sex when it comes to physiological response. We might have more muscle mass, but we are weak. And the sooner you realize that and own it, the easier your life becomes. All right? Take that hint. Okay, someone bring the girls back in, because they didn't need to hear that, and we don't need to give them any more power than what they have. So bring the girls back in. Girls, you can turn your mics back on, whatever you need to do. All right? So the birthing process, all right? We don't understand that as guys. Right? We don't have the capability to understand that. But the girls will tell you that they are thankful for a positive feedback system, because it's that positive feedback loop that pushes that parasitic alien that has been sucking life out of them and growing in them for 9 months. It pushes that parasitic alien out. And without that positive feedback loop, that parasitic alien would never leave. What happens? Well, what happens is the uterus starts to contract, and that sends neural impulses to the hypothalamus, which tells the posterior pituitary to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin travels through the blood and stimulates the uterus to contract. More uterine contractions sends more nerve impulses to the hypothalamus, telling the pituitary to secrete more oxytocin. More oxytocin causes more and greater uterine contractions, which causes more neural pathways to stimulate the hypothalamus, to stimulate the pituitary, to secrete more oxytocin. See, here, the oxytocin levels are not being brought back down into normal range. It's being first forced into greater disproportionate levels. It's increasing it for the purpose of increasing uterine contraction, to be able to push the fetus out, or as I like to call it, the parasitic alien. It pushes that parasitic alien out, that little baby. The oxytocin levels, once the uterine contractions stop, nerve impulses stop, the pituitary stops secreting oxytocin, but the oxytocin levels remain high for up to about a week to 2 weeks. And the reason for that is because you've got this deflated balloon called the uterus that is now voided of the parasitic alien, And the oxytocin continues to allow the uterus to contract to get it back down to the size of a fist. Positive feedback can be good. Fever is a positive feedback response. Why do you need a fever? Well, because it directly helps to fight bacterial, allergen, and viral infections. So take the case of a bacteria. Right? Bacteria tend to denature their proteins. In other words, their proteins tend to break down in and around 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, human proteins tend to start denaturing or breaking down around 105.5 or so. And so we have a higher threshold. Our proteins don't break down as easily as bacterial proteins. So you get a fever of 101, you've got usually a bacterial infection. So the bacterial proteins start breaking down because you've spiked this fever. Well, the bacteria try to give you like one last screw you. They release these neurotoxins or these endotoxins. And these endotoxins or neurotoxins begin to increase the fever. So the fever goes from 101 to 101.1 to 101.3 to 101 or to 100, 101.4 to 101.6. It starts to climb. Well, the higher the fever, the more you break down the proteins within the bacteria, the more endotoxins you're releasing. The more endotoxins you're releasing, the higher the fever go. The higher the fever go, the more bacteria you're killing. The more bacteria you're killing, the more endotoxins you're releasing. It's a positive feedback loop because the response is to drive the fever higher. Why? To kill the bacteria. To break down the proteins within the allergen or the parasite. To kill off the virus. Lactation, prolactin. Those levels increase. Why? Milk production. Right? Very often that the suckling is what increases the prolactin level at first, which allows the milk to let down. You get that nice colostrum at first, high protein. Right? And then as the colostrum comes in, it gives the time for the milk to come in and the milk gets let down. Right? The suckling does it. Well, anybody who has been breastfeeding, guys, again, this is something that we can't relate to. But ladies, if you've ever breastfed, you will know that those prolactin levels remain high enough to where just hearing a baby cry, not even your own little alien, someone else's alien on the other side of the supermarket could be crying, and what happens? You start releasing milk because those prolactin levels remain elevated. And so you're very sensitive to that feeding mechanism. It's important. Urine production. The bladder fills up. Stretch receptors within the smooth muscles starts to activate this sensation of wanting to urinate. Well, the more that the bladder stretches, the greater the sensation is because it's waste. You want to get rid of it. So the urge increases. That's positive feedback. Now, there are not anywhere near as many positive feedback mechanisms as there are negative feedback. There is many more negative feedback examples than what there are positive feedback. But we can see where positive feedback becomes important. And so here we've got an example where, once again, you've got some end product that is produced, but instead of backing off the production of that, the pathway is amplified and you produce even more. You produce even more. Blood clotting is another example. And so see if you can take this image and understand what's the stimulus, what is the receptor, what is the control center, what's the effector, and what's being pushed further out of release. I will say this is something we get into a lot more in AMP2 when we look at blood and the cardiovascular system, mainly within the chapter that deals with the blood. We deal with this a lot more. because this is very complex. This is very fascinating, but it is an example of positive feedback. Right? You want more histamine released. You want more heparin released. You want more macrophages and more neutrophils and more basophils, or what we call mast cells, to be brought into the area. You want interleukins to be released to call in the platelets. You want the fibrinogen to become fibrin to be able to cause the clot. What directs all of that? What maintains that? His clotting factors. Again, we go through this in detail in AMP2. But can you make out the basics here on why this is a positive feedback? Pause the video and try to look at that. What makes this a positive feedback system? Thank God it's a positive feedback system, because you don't want to be able to, if this did not continue, you'd bleed out. And I can tell you that that's not usually conducive to life. Blood is supposed to go round and round. Air is supposed to go in and out. If air doesn't go in and out and blood goes out, that's bad things. That's like day one of EMT school. Blood goes round and round, air goes in and out, and the two shall never exchange places. All right. Here's the birthing process, getting rid of that little parasitic alien in you. All right. Can you understand how, again, this fits the scheme for being positive feedback? Right. Hopefully you can. Hopefully you'll take that time and reflect on that, because this, again, is where the learning happens. Now, that was a lot. All right, that was a lot. You can rewatch these videos over and over again. It's one of the beauties. It's one of the beauties and the benefits of having these videos like this. You can rewind. You can take your own notes. You can fast forward. You can redo the questions that are. You can do whatever you need to do. I'm here for your learning and your abuse. So keep that in mind. You'll notice in the PowerPoint that there is a lot more slides that come after that. That's all stuff to help you review for the lab. All right, so you'll see that there's directional terms, there's planes, there's sections, there's abdominal divisions, all that that's all pertaining to the lab stuff, and it's there to help you review for the lab content. So please feel free to use that. I'm not going to go over that. We could always communicate about that through class type stuff and questions and all of that. So we're going to stop here. All right, you've successfully completed Chapter 1. Congratulations. Keep studying. Keep sending me those questions. Keep reviewing. Keep doing it. This is week 1, and you're already doing well, and you're off to a good start. So again, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll catch you on the flip side.